Rebekah Lyons is a best-selling author, renowned speaker, mother of 4, founder of Q Ideas, and she is no stranger to the soul-crushing effects of anxiety. She's here with us today about how we can talk about how we are able to find rhythms of renewal in life and live our best lives yet. Hi, Rebekah.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Very good.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So your journey into anxiety and panic began 7 years ago. You'd moved your family to New York City.
Right.
From Tennessee.
Well, no, from Atlanta, actually.
From Atlanta?
It was actually 10 years ago. When I wrote the book, It was 7 years ago. But now it's been a decade,
okay.
yes.
It's been a decade.
Yes, 2010, we moved to New York City. Our kids were in elementary school, and 4 months into our time there, I had my first panic attack. And so that lasted until the end of 2011.
Okay.
And that's when kind of Lord brought me into a healing journey, just flooded me with peace. But those first months, it was planes, trains, elevators, subways, crowds.
Yeah.
Pretty much everywhere I went in New York, I was always gripped in fear and tried to avoid those things.
Yes, and that first panic attack occurred on a plane,
Yes,
right?
it did.
Yes. I was on a work trip about 3 weeks ago, and I suddenly felt like I was so panicked and having a panic attack myself, and I did want to run to the front of the plane. So when I was reading your book,
right,
I thought, oh my goodness, I'm not alone. How common is it that people are struggling with anxiety?
I poll people a lot when I'm speaking. I'll just say, show of hands. And I feel like every year the number of hands grows. Because a lot of people don't have language for panic attack. It's like something under the umbrella of anxiety disorder, but to what extent? But panic is when your body starts to physically act out. It almost responds as if you're being held at gunpoint. It's that kind of visceral, like the heart beating, racing, shallow breathing. It's that fight or flight mode of the brain that amygdala is like, alert, 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 danger is here. The problem is danger isn't really there. So you're trying to make sense of it. You're like, am I having a heart attack? What's going on? But for me, it rooted in claustrophobia, and it was this fear of being trapped. So it was not about turbulence for me. It was more like, if the plane goes down, I won't be able to get off. I'll be trapped in here. And so that's why elevators, subways, all of a sudden in New York, there was always like no personal space in the city. And so it was always kind of like triggering that for me.
Absolutely. And New York City is a place where
nobody cares if they're right here next to you.
No.
They're like, we can fit 14 more people on in this like 3 feet space. Come on. Yeah.
So you went through a journey. One night you woke up and God was saying something to you.
Yeah. Well, I finally hit surrender.
Yeah.
And in the middle of the night, I woke up just in a panic attack. At this point, it was no longer siloed to those small spaces. It was just in my bed or walking the streets or at the playground. I just always was manifesting that because it was so frequent. Yeah. And I just sensed the Lord just like prompt me. I just cried out, rescue me. Deliver me. I cannot do this without you. And in that moment, my body just broke on the bed and all was gone. It was still. And I try to describe it now because I've had a lot of years since. It was like I was just flooded with this peace that passes understanding, this peace the world cannot give, the peace of Christ. And I just was kind of like, what just happened? Because I really couldn't even move. I was just laying there for a while, just totally still. The next day I walk out of my apartment. Of like, did it take, But, the problem is when you're sick, you only look inward and see what's broken. But when a healing journey begins, you look up and you look out and you begin to see everyone else. And that day I started to notice people just like me, women, men and women gripped in fear. And I didn't have another panic attack for 7 years. And that's how I really began this last book, Rhythms of Renewal, was the relapse moment. We're like, oh, I thought we were good. But it was a reminder from God, where he says, I don't promise fear won't come knocking, but I always make a way of escape. You'll be able to bear it. And so this latest book is really about like, how does God offer us daily rescue, daily escape through these rhythms that renew us, that give us sustained emotional, mental health.
Yeah, that's right. And it's interesting, like mental health is on a spectrum. We all have low or high levels of it. And sometimes in our journey through mental health, we have to facilitate and foster higher levels of mental health and wellness.
Right.
And I find that your book, Rhythms of Renewal, actually, it really does that.
Yeah.
Each of the sections that you have, right?
Right. The 4 rhythms.
The 4 rhythms.
Yeah.
And, I just think about how much of a challenge it is sometimes to even take ourselves to a place where we can begin to find restoration. But
because you just become so desperate that you're like, give me a plan and I'll work the plan, because
That's
you
right.
realize that you
Yeah.
can't actually have transformation until you take one small step at a time every single day for the rest of your life. Like rhythm is going to happen every day. You're going to eat, you're going to sleep, you're going to have community, you're going to get time with God, you're going to work.
Yeah.
But are you going to be really mindful on how you do those things? Move your body, use food for fuel, raise serotonin by elevating your heart rate, and connecting with friends and the dopamine. Like your body needs all these things to be fully human, to like operate in rhythm and be healthy and whole. But so often we get out of balance or out of rhythm because we don't want to, we're working too hard, but we're not connecting with our friends, right? Or we're working out, but then we kind of like don't care about our time with God, or sometimes like, or we're not really risking in the dream. So those 4 rhythms are rest, restore, connect, and create. And I really wanted to outline those throughout the book of going, is your inner life okay in that spiritual rhythm of rest? Are you and God okay? Are you getting that morning routine down? Do you have routines for deep sleep? Are you really learning how to take a real rest? Because you cannot run if you cannot rest. And then the restore is your physical health. Like, are you using food for fuel or just caffeine? Are you on a liquid diet of coffee all day long? That might increase your anxiety. Go figure, right?
That's right.
Are you getting active and moving your body? Because your body actually gets more stressed if it has no release. And the average person sits for 9.3 hours a day. And that's not how things were when Jesus was around. Scholars believe he walked like 3,000 miles in 3 years based on all the places he went. So I think that's a good reminder for us. Like, we need to physically be strong and take care of our bodies.
Absolutely. And with rest, I love something that you said at the start. I'm reading it, and it's like, a lot of us think we have to earn rest.
Yeah.
And you're saying rest is a posture.
Yeah, you run fueled from a posture of rest.
Yes.
Rest, rest requires pursuit. When Jesus says, come into my rest, come get away with me, recover your life, and you'll find rest for your soul. It requires us to pursue rest. It doesn't just happen. Rest is not numbing out. I think people think rest is a Netflix binge. It's not. Rest is actually replenishing. That when you're on the other side of that rest, you're like ready to go. You feel full, you feel alive, you feel like you got restored, and now you're ready to go out and connect with people and create.
Yes, absolutely. And as you connect with people, sometimes there's anxiety around connecting with people, friendships. And I read something very interesting you spoke about in your book about how to approach friendship, because you even have had anxiety around friendships. Sometimes you're thinking, I'm not saying that right, I'm not doing this right, I should change this. They just looked at me funny. What can I do to make this work?
We can all be insecure, right, in our relationships. I was 40, moving to a new city of Nashville, and I'm like, I got to start over. It's a little intimidating, right? No matter what age you are. Like, my daughter was starting middle school, and I was like, I think you compliment their hair and you tell her their outfit looks cute. Like, we're just like joking about how we're like all going out today to try to find a friend. But truly, the theme of that connect rhythm is all relational health. It's that output rhythm, like how can we be the friend we wish to have? And that was what that chapter was about. Like, hey, there's probably someone around you that's just as insecure in friendships or might feel a little lonely right now. We do have a loneliness epidemic right now in our society. So just look for the person who kind of feels a little like outside of the crowd, and just go approach them and be kind to them, and then all of a sudden you'll find that you get your thoughts are off yourself. They're more serving somebody else, and then you're going to find joy in doing that, and you'll make a friend. So
absolutely.
And there's a good encouragement.
It is. And there's nothing like finding out you're not alone.
Yeah.
Often when you're with others, we're struggling with similar things.
Right.
It could be marriage, it could be identity, it could be weight, it could be anything.
For sure.
But you suddenly know you're not alone.
Which is why I wrote that chapter on vulnerability.
Yes.
Because you have to lead with vulnerability.
Yes.
But that brings connection, which brings stronger friendships.
Yes.
So somebody's got to go first at going like, hey, I kind of struggle with this stuff. It's okay. Like, you're not alone in this. And then somebody's like, they reciprocate and go, yeah, I feel stronger, like that when you're alone and vulnerable, you're afraid, but when you're together and vulnerable, you become brave. And that's the idea, is that in these very vulnerable relationships and groups of friends, you all rally, when somebody shares something, everyone comes around and go, yeah, me too. You're not alone in this. This is not the end of your story.
Yeah. And you talk a lot in your book about labels, how labels are very dangerous. Labels are dangerous in the journey of mental health and wellness.
Yeah.
Because we are going to have highs and lows in it. God's with us in it. We can practice Rhythms of
Right.
of renewal.
Yeah.
We can get help with counsel.
Sure.
But there are labels
Yeah.
connected to these struggles.
Right, because labels, sometimes we think that they don't, to me, a label is what describes what comes against you, but it doesn't define who you are. And sometimes we misconstrue labels as our identity, right? And so, but once you know someone, you no longer label them. And so on either side of the spectrum, whether you're the one being labeled or the one who sees someone as a label, I'm all about like, let's throw those things out the door, because really they're a human just like you. The label might just be helping you understand what they're trying to navigate, but has nothing to do with their identity. Their identity is secure in who God says they are. And so I have 2 children with Down syndrome, and a lot of people will just know them as that label, and then they get to know them and they're like no longer are even thinking about that label. Because again, once you know someone, you no longer label them. So it's all about getting past whatever that thing is and just being in relationship and connection.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're like, hey, we're a lot more the same than I thought.
Yes, that's right. And knowing that God has created each one of us uniquely. Psalm 139 says he knit us together in our mother's womb intentionally for, the gifts of surprise and community and all the interesting things.
That diversity in the church is the most beautiful thing. We all learn so much from each other. Yeah,
that's right. Now you think, you write in your book that creativity is very important to this rhythm.
Yes.
Right? So
that's the crescendo where you got rest, restore is the input rhythms, connect and create are the output, and create is like my jam. I just love it because it's all about our vocational health. Like, what are the gifts and talents that God's given you to offer something to the world, to serve someone else, to where your heart will come alive, and you'll just sing because you're like, I'm doing what I was made to do, and God invites me into this. He gives me kind of those birthright gifts, and then he calls out destiny over me and says, all your days were written and planned before one of them began. And the call of God needs the move of God and the gifting of God, right? So I think it pleases him so much when all those things align in our vocation, which that root word is vocare, which means to call. So it really is our calling. It's the thing that is our bent.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much purpose once we connect to calling our bent. And it's really like, they say if you do something you love, you'll never work a day in your life.
Right.
To describe how it feels, that's how it feels.
Exactly.
You're moving in the way God's called you. With your journey with, anxiety and some depression, where do you think you'd be today if you didn't have God in that journey? So your book outlines very healthy lifestyle tips that any professional counselor or,
that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, would tell
give it
you.
out. Yes.
Follow these. Yeah, absolutely. You will have thriving levels of mental health and wellness. But, how do you feel? Where do you think you'd be if God wasn't part of that rhythm?
Well, I think my goal is that faith and science have to go together because God is the one, I believe, who made our bodies.
Yes.
And he knows what they need and what we need physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally. And he uses all means necessary to heal us. So I think if you're just going in the clinical direction and faith isn't a part of it, you're definitely missing something, because God's not confused about the fact that if you hold a hug for 3 to 5 seconds, it releases dopamine, which gives you connection and belonging, because he's a communal God who made us to be a communal people who need each other. Yeah. So he wired us. The more I'm learning about the brain and the body, I'm hanging over there in that clinical space going like, this is amazing. This is only building my faith of what God actually wants for us, the fullness of us in his nature as healer. He's like, hey, don't shrink back from psychology or psychiatry, but know that I'm the one at the helm here. I knit you, and I know what you need, and part of it's getting back to being human, submitting to the rules of rhythm, the boundaries of rhythm, because they're for our health. We need sleep. We need to get off technology so much, right? We need to connect with our people. We need to break bread, give hugs, just be present, and all of a sudden we'll find that the anxiety and the stress starts to be kept at bay because we're really pursuing the things that God calls us to in his word. Yeah, that's right. In your book, near the end, you speak about within your create section, you speak about saying yes to God. Yes. Saying yes to God in surprising ways, because often as we, almost unpack and get into a rhythm with God and, we are where we need to be in a healthy way, he's ready to ask us to do something. When you said yes to something so amazing. Oh, man. And it changed your life, didn't it? Yeah, it does. Usually God, I feel like for all of us, he invites us into things. And I had to look at it this way. It wasn't like, what am I going to be risking? Or, So we adopted. My yes was a yes to adoption. We had brought home a little girl from China about a year and a half ago. She's in kindergarten, so I have 3 high schoolers and a kindergartner. Right? So we've got prom and pull-ups at night happening in the same household. And she has just brought life to all of us. But at the time we said yes, I thought we were going to be empty nesters in 5 years. We had our 20th anniversary, our wedding anniversary, but now we're going back to kindergarten. And it doesn't make logical sense, but God, we kept going. God is inviting us into something He cares deeply about. And that adoption thing was always in the back of our mind, but we just kind of felt like we were getting too old and the kids were getting too old, and maybe that ship had sailed, and God's like, not on my timetable. And I see now how much joy, her name is Joy, how much joy she is bringing our family. We're getting to re-experience Christmas through her eyes, like my teens too. And now I can't remember what life was like before her. Yeah. It doesn't feel like a sacrifice whatsoever. It feels like we have been so blessed to have been given this youth and this vigor and this delight in our home. And I feel like we hit the jackpot on what this scenario looks like, and I couldn't be more grateful.
Yeah, sometimes we can't imagine what God has in store for us.
Right.
We can't even dream it up, right?
Right.
But then it's so rewarding. It's such a gift.
Well, my oldest had Down syndrome, and I wanted to be able to choose Down syndrome. And so I joke that Kate and Joy are our Down syndrome bookends. But then I learned with God to maybe not say bookends. I'm like, I really do feel like we're full and done, but I'm like, well, you never know. But for today, they are our bookends. And it is really precious because they have a special bond as my other 2 are looking at colleges, and knowing that that's kind of the dynamic. 2 Kate's not looking at the same future as Pierce is. Yeah. And so we have to be thinking the long game of like, what is a family? What is our family going to be, and how can we even as a hub, Gabe and I never really will be empty nesters fully. Yeah. And so it's kind of like, well, why not? The more the merrier, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. It's an inspiring book that you've written, Rhythms of Renewal. It really shows us that there's freedom to be found through anxiety, depression, struggles in this world.
Sure.
And there's also so much purpose. As we slow down, we can build. And then God partners with us in all of it, and great things can come out of it. I'm just so happy that you're with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.